Bona tarda. Benvinguts a BBVA. Soc Antoni Vallabriga, director global de negoci responsable del banc, i encantats de que estiguin tots aquí en aquesta jornada dintre del projecte de Recity que venim recolzant i treballant conjuntament amb la Fundació Catalunya-Europa, una iniciativa que segurament coneixeu en les darreres intervencions que hem anat tenint en els darrers mesos, per intentar fer propostes concretes al voltant del rol de les ciutats i de les àrees metropolitanes en la lluita contra el canvi climàtic. És una iniciativa des que el banc ens sentim molt orgullosos de recolzar i que encaixa perfectament en la nostra estratègia de canvi climàtic i desenvolupament sostenible que venim empenyent des de fa prop d'un any, amb l'objectiu no només de mobilitzar el capital que és necessari per fer aquesta transició, que és cada vegada més urgent, sinó també per alinear progressivament la nostra activitat a l'Acord de París. Vull agrair especialment a l'assistència de la KIRSTEN Dunlop, la CEO de Climactic, la plataforma de referència en temes d'innovació climàtica a Europa. És un gran luxe tenir-la entre nosaltres. Jo crec que avui ens permetrà veure com s'està empenyent també tot el tema d'innovació climàtica des d'aquesta plataforma i sobretot aportant aquesta visió tan necessària de cooperació, de col·laboració, d'aliances entre les entitats, institucions i les empreses i l'ecosistema emprenedor en general, no? També tinc entre nosaltres el Lorenzo Geleri, que és un dels membres del comitè científic del projecte Recity, i al qual agraeixo també l'assistència avui i que farà una mica de presentació i de moderació de la sessió. Res més, agrair a Kirsten, agrair a Lorenzo, agrair l'assistència de tots vostès i després tindrem temps també per qualsevol tipus de preguntes i comentaris. Moltes gràcies.
Gracias, Tony. Gracias por haber venido. Yo soy el asesor científico de esa parte de ese proyecto Recity de Climate Change. Recity es una plataforma innovadora que pretende alinear y encontrar indicadores y debatir sobre 4 temas sinergísticos que hoy quizá en esta charla serán los 4 igual de relevantes respecto al cambio climático. En cuanto en ese año la plataforma Recity pretende presentar varios aspectos relacionados con el cambio climático, los retos del cambio climático y la innovación, pero el proyecto Recity de año en año explora 4 temas distintos, como quizá quien nos sigue ha podido escuchar. Y estos retos son relacionados a Multicultural Society, a Technology, a Social Justice y cambio climático. Entonces, la charla de hoy, después de haber visto cómo el cambio climático afecta a nuestras ciudades, cuáles son los impactos futuros y las amenazas, la urgencia que ahora se está declarando de responder al cambio climático, decimos que hemos intentado dar un overview en estos meses de cuáles son las soluciones, cuáles son las estrategias de respuestas, cuáles son las buenas prácticas. Con esta charla de hoy exploramos los mecanismos de implementación, cuáles son las innovaciones, qué significa innovar y qué significa innovar de manera distinta. Entonces, la innovación es algo que obviamente puede poner en discusión o no nuestro modelo de negocio, nuestro modelo de hacer las cosas. Puede ser un tipo de innovación que simplemente mejora la performance de nuestro actual sistema de producción o lo cambia. Entonces, hoy con nosotros tenemos el placer de tener la CEO del Climactic. Ella lo explicará mejor que yo, que es es la plataforma europea de referencia en cuanto a partnership público-privada de cara a la innovación y la implementación de todas las estrategias e innovaciones de cambio climático. Obviamente en ámbito urbano son las que nos interesan más hoy. Sin robarle más tiempo, Dr. Kirsten tiene una inmensa experiencia en términos tanto de consultoría cuanto de financial system, banking, pero también académico, con lo cual es un perfil muy interesante, muy polivalente. Y he trabajado muchos años antes de estar aquí en Europa con nosotros liderando Climactic. Ha estado también en Australia, impulsando la creación del Australian Climactic. Y hoy pues viene aquí a presentarnos la realidad del Climate Kick in Europe. Entre nosotros también está José Luis Muñoz Bonet, que es el director del Spanish hub de Climactic, con lo cual por si alguien luego quiere hacer preguntas, etcétera, creo que ahí está José Luis, puede contestar y profundizar el debate a nivel local, pero pues sin más tiempo robarle a Kirsten. Aquí está, the floor is yours. I will... Yeah. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Kirsten.
Okay, I don't like sitting behind desks, so I'm going to walk around, if you don't mind. First of all, thank you very much for allowing me to speak in English. I do actually speak Italian well, but in my experience that doesn't necessarily get you so far. And when I experiment from Italian into Spanish, it's often fatal. So my apologies for speaking in English, but I will go slowly and make sure that I have empathy with the translation if you're using that. My name is KIRSTEN DUNLOP. I am Australian in part and from many other places, born in Europe and raised in different places all over the world, Africa, Europe, Australia, and so on. I have led Climactic as an organization for 2.5 years, and it has been a critical juncture in a European context of the review of Horizon 2020, European research and innovation funding, and what should be the direction for the next major program of work, Horizon Europe, particularly in the context of some of the significant societal challenges that we face, of which climate change is foremost. The KIC in this name stands for Knowledge Innovation Community. If you are resident in the city of Barcelona, you are proud winners of the latest of the KICs, focused on mobility. There are 2 KICs that were awarded this year, one on mobility and one on advanced manufacturing. And the city of Barcelona is right at the center of the mobility KIC. And indeed, we are very enthusiastic about a fruitful and important partnership between what we do and what the mobility KIC is aiming to achieve. KIC stands for Knowledge Innovation Community. It's a European construct born with Barroso as part of the investment in giving Europe something that would allow us to compete with the US, and particularly compete with the challenge of commercialization of innovation. How to move from the wealth of innovation, of ideation, of research, of blue chip thinking in universities, in technology institutions, technical institutes, and in industry, research and development, and move it to market in such a way that we could compete in something like the same degree of commercial scale, productivity, jobs and growth as has been seen in the US. That was the intent at the time. The institution that was set up was the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, and 3 of the knowledge innovation communities were born, each of them as a mandate, as a tender offered to a winning consortium to take on a 15-year mandate to direct innovation at a particular societal challenge. Climate, us, energy and digital transformation at the time, and then subsequently health, raw materials, food, and now the last 2 on mobility and advanced manufacturing. And these are public-private partnerships, as Lorenzo was describing, inherently in their structure. They are designed to operate as orchestrators of European Commission funding, so our money as taxpayers, being distributed to organizations that are working in a combination of effects, from industry, research and development, business model reinvention, to startup generation, entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial development, university students, masters, postgraduate, graduate, undergraduate, school education, professional education, boards of directors, but also then the work that goes on in cities and communities and regions to bring innovation to bear on real-world challenges and real-world opportunities. Every single KIC is different, very much or in part as a result either of its business model or its relationship to the challenge it serves. In our particular case, we were born with a purpose and an intent to do something about climate change, both on the mitigation side, how do we get ourselves off the fossil fuel, fossil carbon addiction, And on the other side, adaptation. How will we change our societies, our ways of living and working to adapt to a set of changed climatic conditions which we will have to live with no matter what? We have always conceived of this challenge as being an inherently social challenge, social and economic, more than technological. This is not about energy substitution. This is about changing almost everything about the way we live, we work, we play, we live with each other, and even more importantly, the way in which we conceive of ourselves in relationship to each other and to the physical environment in which we live and to the multiple other species with whom we live. So we have framed it and we've understood it from the beginning as about an interdependent problem of solving for the way we impact the environment and solving for the way in which we work and live with each other. What has changed for us in the last 10 years, we will be 10 years old at the end of this year, is the meaning that sits behind a vision like this. A prosperous, inclusive, climate resilient society with circular, net zero emissions economy by 2050. First of all, it's too late. We know that 2050 is simply too late, especially for Europe. If we are to contribute what we should be contributing in the context of a planetary challenge, we need to decarbonize by 2035, 2040, which is a significant ratchet up to where we are now. Secondly, no one really knows what a circular net zero emissions economy looks like. We talk about it, but we don't have practical demonstrations of what that actually looks like, how to finance it, how to benefit from it, how to design its process flows, how to ensure that somehow they continue to be both global and local. We have not understood that. We've understood a lot about material flows, but not the entire social and economic design that sits behind it. And we have persistently been privileging mitigation and decarbonisation over adaptation. And yet now we are beginning to understand that this is a very important continuum, one can lead to the other, and that if we don't pay attention to adaptation, we're going to be dealing with a set of early and mid-onset effects of climate change that are going to literally panic us out of any reach of structural solutions. So we need to manage the spectrum of the human experience of change in the context of floods, storms, migration, food, water, tourism, the things that are structuring our lives on a daily basis. And we need to do it differently from the way we've done it before. Our reflection of the last 2 years has been that we have in many ways learned an enormous lot about what not to do. And that, in fact, has coincided with a lot of the reflections that has been happening in Europe, with the Lamy report, with a series of reflections around we have been pouring euros into innovation, but it's still not bringing us to try transformative change. It's still stuck in pockets and silos and linked to polemics and barriered behind vested interests and stuck in political debates and not quite breaking through a sense of generative structural change and possibility. So one of our major conclusions are we are the foremost European instrument for climate innovation. If there's one thing we need to make sure we do for the next 10 years, it is not continue to produce incremental solutions that are technology optimistic. We need to point in direct innovation to produce profound systemic change and systems transformations. And that's a different way of doing innovation. Secondly, we really need to take into account temporality, velocity. This is not something we can afford to do slowly. So we need a very different way of understanding what the ways in which we think about timing and time generally, speed, scale, velocity, and intergenerational responsibilities and possibilities. And that's why we have launched at the end of last year a strategy called Transformation in Time, where our emphasis here is how do we simultaneously change the model of innovation, get innovation working differently, and do so with an eye to the clock. Now, to give you a little bit of a sense of our sense-making around that context, we knew in 2017 that Europe was not on track when it comes to the Paris targets. We know that the Paris targets are not remotely on track for a world in which we are likely to survive. And we knew already that our target here on 95% reductions by 2050, which is official European policy, would require 6 times increase, a multiple of 6 increase in the average global carbon intensity reduction we've so far achieved. So that's a major step up. If you then look at where we are now, where in fact emissions, if anything, are going up, it's an even bigger challenge. You take the Ipcc report from last year on 1.5 degrees, and you think about the fact that this is not just a massive increase, speed up in terms of what we're doing, but that the window is now. It's not an infinite period of time. There is a period of 12 years to make extremely structural changes, which means if you translate it into personal decision-making terms, it's on our watch. It's not something my children will solve for, that I will prepare the ground for, educate them about, enable, try to store up and create the conditions for. It's on my watch. What will I have done in 12 years that will have made a material difference to this? And those are the questions we are asking ourselves and asking the partners that are part of the Climactic ecosystem. We are taking inspiration from the conclusions of the Ipcc report, which was calling out the fact that we have been working on this problem for decades, literally decades. There are hundreds of projects everywhere in the world on decarbonisation, to some extent on adaptation. They're not adding up to transformation because we are running them in the buckets and categories and silos that still feel comfortable. We're not asking industries to dismantle every single boundary between industry to industry and design for the interfaces. We're still running manufacturing businesses and production businesses and consumption businesses and banking and insurance businesses, everyone in their own little channel. And the frequency and discomfort in the ways in which we think about the relationships across, we are investing a minuscule amount in compared to the amount of money we're investing in pure energy substitution. So that leads us to a very significant challenge. On the one hand, a 2.5% GDP cost globally to address anything like the 12-year structural change challenge. But on the other hand, an extraordinary opportunity for an industrial revolution that has some design features that are fundamentally different to the way in which we have done industry and economies in the past. They will require us to be distributed, democratized, spread, participatory, co-creative. The opportunities for the way in which we redesign societies and economies for participation and contribution are extraordinary. And last year there was a figure put onto that just between now and 2030 of 26 trillion in dollars, which is a reasonably decent business opportunity if you're currently out there in the market looking for your next generation challenge. The question is, reframe it like that. And we have a partnership with, we partner with a lot of cities. Very recently was in a long conversation with the city of Amsterdam, struggling with exactly this thing, determined to stop making it about I'm taking away your car, I'm taking away your meat, I'm taking away access to the center of the city. Start making it about I'm giving you clean air. I'm giving you a greener street. I'm giving you the possibility of living in community. I'm giving you water you can swim in. And of course, for us in Europe, there is a really interesting challenge. We produce technology solutions. We pride ourselves on the possible delusional idea that we will be shipping technology solutions to the rest of the world when we are very ill-prepared and ill-informed on what's happening in China. We tell ourselves that we can play and we will play a leadership role. That's our rhetoric. It's written into our strategy and our policy statements. Europe will be a leader in climate change. And at the same time, we have a huge, we are going into elections this weekend. We have a huge set of tensions around who benefits from that. Is everybody coming along? Whose narrative is that? Is it something I can relate to? Not if I work in Silesia. And so we have a really interesting challenge where I think our leadership role potentially sits with our capability of understanding and managing complex, culturally diverse governance. And the narratives of different cultures coming together and holding in trust the peace project that is ultimately what Europe is all about. But that's the competitive advantage we would need to lean into. And that really gives us some of the huge debates and questions that are currently surfacing and in debate being discussed in the European Commission. What should our mission be? If we set ourselves on a path of redirecting innovation in a way that pulls through transformational change, we take inspiration from the notion of mission-led innovation. We start setting dramatic challenges. Take, if you have not yet read it, John Maynard Keynes' pamphlet on how to fund a war, which simply says, stop thinking in terms of balancing the books. Start thinking on the greatest challenge you need to solve for and direct your energy there. The finance will follow. What should our mission be? What is Europe's greatest challenge and greatest opportunity with this respect? Now, let me tell you a little bit about what Climactic is doing in that picture and a little bit about what we are doing in Spain. And then I will stop so that this is hopefully much more of a conversation about what you think we should be doing or could be doing. We have a structure which is designed as a community. We work with over 400 partners across the whole European perimeter in 28 countries. We have offices in 23. We also work with quite a number of projects in Sub-Saharan Africa, in South America. We have partnerships in China. Wherever European partners have supply chains or business interests, or where European cities and regions are partnering. We work on a number of impact goals where we are challenging ourselves to work backwards from the problem, to shift away from focusing on supplying innovation to market and increasingly start to ask ourselves, if we need to create resilient and green cities by 2030-35, what needs to change? What are all of the things that needs to change? Not just whether or not we've got electric cars, but what is every single aspect that needs to change, and how would you design an innovation program for that? And that leads us to a very different way, deliberately different way of practicing innovation, which we are in the thick of making happen at the moment. It's challenging. It challenges a lot of the underpinning assumptions about how public money should be used, about what research and innovation looks like. What it means is we are shifting from a world where we publish a call for proposals, we ask for people's ideas, and then we ask a lot of experts out in the world to tell us which of the ideas we've received are the most innovative, which should attract the money. And ultimately what they're looking for is either a technocratic assessment of technical merits, or what they're looking for are winners, which are the most interesting investable propositions. But the focus of attention is on the single proposal. And that bakes in a fatal flaw in the system, because it means that the single proposal is what travels through, the single proposal is what is built up and developed to attract funding, and the single proposal attracting funding is supposed to somehow change the world. And we have produced many of them. We are proud to have produced over 1,000 startups, and some of them are household names. They're Lilium, Volocopter, Climeworks. Many of them have attracted massive investment from China. And there are solutions. Electric planes, electric helicopters, carbon capture and reuse. Tado, you saw the picture of the thermostat. There are important single solutions. When you add them up, they're not changing the entire energy infrastructure of cities. They're not changing the way all houses are built. They're not changing the way in which we make choices on how to move to work. And that's what we are really now seeking to do for these next 12 critical years, directing innovation in such a way that it achieves or works to achieve some form of systemic effect. Now, what that looks like in practice is that we partner with cities, with regions, with companies at a board of director level, and sit down and agree these are the things that need to change in that same logic. If it needs to be green and resilient, what needs to give? And then build with them and for them a portfolio. Not a whole lot of single solutions, but a huge, big spread of multiple, diverse possibilities, working in parallel, tested together. And I'll give you an example of some of those. Ideally, built in such a way that individual citizens and residents get to choose and participate and co-create on which of the different things a city will try, or a country in some cases. And we are looking to try and accentuate and accelerate the notion of learning by doing. Because one of the biggest challenges we all face is it's very difficult to get our heads around, so what's the alternative look like? Does it mean we have no comforts? Does it mean we live a life that feels like 19th century austerity? Is it technological, we all stay put, nobody moves anywhere? Exactly what does it look like to live sustainably and somehow continue to live with a sense of well-being? And we need, because seeing is believing, to start to see large-scale demonstrations, which is where cities like Barcelona come in, because cities are where 70% of the world population resides. In some ways, they are the greatest. If you think about stranded assets, Sydney's cities are the stranded assets of the future. The cities that are too close to floodplains, the cities that have infrastructure that simply won't cope with 40 and 50-degree heat, the cities that are not designed for water disasters, for water disappearing, the cities that were not designed for massively dense populations fleeing from other worse disasters. Those are the stranded assets we're going to be dealing with. They are the greatest concentration risk, and at the same time, they are our greatest source of hope. Because if we do panic and we all flee to the hills, it will be so much more difficult to individually reduce the way in which we use resources. If we stick together and we use our collective ingenuity en masse, we have a much greater chance of finding the kind of solutions at scale that we need. So learning by doing means deep demonstrations of extended, large-scale examples. And there are several. We've just launched an invitation for partners to work with us, with the Port of Valencia, with Mondragon in the Basque Country, with a cohort of cities led by Malmö, Amsterdam, Helsinki, and so on. And we are also looking to try and design innovation in such a way that it comprehends change is not mechanical and linear. Change, when you're talking about changing human beings, is unpredictable and volatile and viral. It's Extinction Rebellion. It's Fridays for the Future. It's people beginning to throw moral switches around what we care about and what we think is normal and okay, as we have done in the past. And those things we need to design into the way in which innovation drives change. Design it into technology, design it into process and supply chain differences and business models. What we do practically is work with our partners. This is a publicly available website. It allows you to see everything that we are working on. You can go in and see all of the initiatives that we're supporting. You will also see that there are many things where we ourselves are asking ourselves, why have we got 15 projects in information analytics around climate-smart agriculture? Do we need 15? Let's do 5 and put the money somewhere else to look at how do the interfaces between the way in which, say, bioengineered seeds are beginning to relate to different processes or water management and so on. So we are taking a portfolio perspective on our own activities and starting to ask, where are the gaps? Where are the concentrations? What do we understand about how to change cities so that we use living and organic material and begin to get better solutions, or use biomimicry to try and understand how to design buildings so that it's more effective with water and more effective with heat? Those are solutions we need to bring in and accelerate much more of. We've got gaps. Now can we look for who out there has ideas, has solutions, who could work with others? So we are using this kind of inside-outside, public-private process of reflection on our whole perimeter of work as a portfolio, but then also with every single city, what's a whole sweep of multiple tiny experiments and big experiments that we could experiment in Barcelona, that we can begin to learn how to make the city different. In terms of where we operate, as I said, we operate across the whole of Europe. We are seeking to balance a tension, a critically important tension between scale and locality, global, local. Because if you think again of what will ultimately drive change, what has historically driven change, an interesting dialogue between something that is perceived as being shared, an inspiration across borders, and at the same time very specific meanings, identity, meaning, resources, needs, assets that belong to specific places. What the city of Barcelona really cares to be in the world, what it cares to stand for, what it's got to work with. So we need to move away from a rhetoric around everything needs to be scaled and start thinking about how do we create a useful relationship between the very specific needs and opportunities of hyperlocal places and the opportunity of learning from what others are doing and taking inspiration, ideas, methods, and possibly technologies and value chains across. So trying to combine working across Europe and being European, and at the same time being specific, regions, valleys, cities, districts, communities, households, neighborhoods, streets. We run 32 accelerators across Europe. We are the biggest clean tech accelerator in the world. And this is, again, a slow and accumulated process of European investment. Some of them, 3 of them we run ourselves. The rest are run by partners in different cities and institutions. Increasingly, we are now, as part of our entire set of reflections, shifting the focus from working with startups to help them go and get capital to help them work with cities, with governments, and with industry, which is a longer, slower, more patient and difficult process, but ultimately the one that will combine into transformation. As I said, we work with other KICs. There are 7 other KICs, and increasingly we are leading a program of work to try and look at opportunities for the KICs to co-locate, or certainly to intensify their relationships with one another. Some of those are accelerating, some of those are coming slower, and some of them, again, will be transited by the cities and the ground we have in common, like the city of Barcelona and Climactic and urban mobility. In the case of Climactic, we are also looking to make sure we don't think about innovation from the inside out. Partner with the usual suspects. Not because the usual suspects aren't helpful, but because in the case of climate change, there is already an enormous groundswell of change happening. It's just happening below the radar. There are edge communities like Solarpunk in Germany that are already adopting a completely different way of living and working, and are doing it on a reasonably large scale. They aren't within anybody's radar because they're not publicizing it, they're not writing white papers, they're not going to conferences, and they're not billing themselves as being about climate change. They're just changing the way they live. So we are hungrily looking for where are the edge communities that we can learn from. And not necessarily the ones that think they're doing this for climate change. They might be doing it for inequality, or they might be doing it to help anticipate and manage humanitarian disasters. But there is an enormous amount to learn, both in resilience, in adaptation, and in mitigation solutions. We run a couple of initiatives that are global, and deliberately so. Climate Launchpad is an initiative designed to open a door of access to individuals who want to work out how could I have a role to play as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, as an ideator in a changing economy and a changing society around climate. Climate Launchpad connects them with other like-minded individuals and gives them something to work on, puts in training, bootcamp training, to get them to a point where there are regional and global finals, and they can go into an entire innovation system around Europe. And increasingly, this year we had an application from Azerbaijan to run the global finals. Increasingly, there is a growing interest from Africa, from Southeast Asia, and from the Middle East and Near East to try and work out how do we get more of a global movement happening. In the case of Climathon, which we were here to discuss last week in Barcelona, this is even more of a global movement. This is a 24-hour hackathon that takes place in October, literally around the world, on 6 continents, where last year more than nearly 150 cities set a challenge to their local residents to say, this is the thing we want to focus on. In the case of Barcelona, I understand it's going to be urban retrofit. How do you change historic buildings when there's so much you want to preserve and at the same time so many things you would need to change? And they put that challenge out to anybody in the city who wants to participate in trying to come up with ideas and solutions, which we then commit to trying to follow through, to support, and to connect up with others. And it's a fantastic thing to be part of. It begins to give a sense of a genuinely global community, starting to connect with each other, people managing all sorts of extraordinary sets of challenges around what it means to be human, to be an urban resident, an urban dweller, to deal with the challenges of proximity, of time, and of the choices you might make in this generation in favor of the next. And we also, as part of the European Institute of Innovation Technology community, Europe is increasingly trying to work out how do we create portals for exchange and reciprocal access to other major areas in the world, also addressing and beginning to realize this is one of the greatest opportunities and the greatest challenges we face. So in January, we will open up in Beijing for a Chinese office for the whole EIT community. We opened up earlier this year in San Francisco. In Tel Aviv, we will open up later in the year. And we have a relationship with Climactic in Australia, which I was part of setting up. Then just a few quick things. Obviously, we can't change the world on our own. This is about deploying innovation. And innovation is one piece in a big puzzle of many other levers for change. But one of the things that we are very deliberate in doing is making sure that we work as much as possible with partnerships. So, for example, the city networks like C40 or the Global Covenant of Mayors, the World Wildlife Fund. There's so much about the interface between climate, biodiversity, sustainability, and resources. We work with Mariana Mazzucato in the UK, who is looking at how do we encourage public money, public institutions, cities, governments, and states to own and appreciate the role that public money plays in unlocking innovation, and has always historically played, and participate in the upsides, not just the downsides. And we work, for example, with the EAT Foundation on thinking about the relationship between climate and food system transformation. There are some worrying and at the same time challenging and stimulating relationships between higher CO2 levels in the atmosphere and what happens to plants, and what happens to human beings with malnutrition that then blocks their ability to behave in more social ways to deal with complex challenges, and so on. If I summarize some of that in terms of achievements looking backwards, what you'll see is something that I look at and get worried about because I see lots of things. But you also see some accumulated momentum and, most importantly, a hell of a lot of learning for what do we do next. 1,000 startups. Now we've just hit 400 partners. Quite a significant amount of climate funding leveraged in terms of complementary activities and spillover effects. Still not enough. And that really is where we're going to. How do we learn from some of the things we're doing, and how do we join it up into a system? And I'm just going to give you some flashes. These are, I suppose, assuming that it would be helpful to have a sense of some of the granules of this. Listen and hear my challenge to ourselves more than anything else. Granules are still not making a difference. So now the challenge for all of us is how we make a difference by making ourselves available to that much more joined up set of interventions. We are working on a solution in supermarket refrigeration is one of the major areas of impacts. Cooling, in fact, is one of the biggest issues that we have and will have more and more of as the temperature rises. So how would you change the relationship between the amount of food waste we produce, the waste that goes into energy emissions that goes into cooling, and the technologies we could use there? We've been working with a lot of climate-smart agricultural initiatives to try and make sure that farmers, both in large scale and small scale, are able to make significantly more granular decisions and improve the way in which they have a productivity effect and carbon emissions footprint. We have a project that we're very hopeful for and proud of because it's like a fractal for a much bigger system, which is about helping smallholder farmers in Africa who are supplying European supermarkets. The beans you get from Kenya are coming from smallholding farmers who have very little in terms of sustaining a risk, the risk of weather and weather changes. And this is a project which is providing them with a line of credit to put in different seed, information from European satellites around water, planting possibilities and choices, weather predictions, and so on. But it takes the risk away from the farmer who can't afford a line of credit by insuring it and guaranteeing it with offtake agreements from European supermarkets who are getting much more volatile, stable supply. And now we are looking to expand the whole thing out into a platform that means that we've tested now with 25,000 farmers. Now we are taking it out to another 12 African nations and creating the kind of knowledge-sharing open innovation system that can mean that supply is actually significantly more stable. It's still a question of why they're supplying to Europe and not to Africa, but that will come. We have launched a fund to help those who are looking to place their investments into climate solutions, into sustainable solutions, understand what is the impact of what they're investing in. We are using a value at risk tool to help insurers actually begin to price in the real externalities and the real nature of the risks that are at play. We are looking at, we run a city matchmaker project and a city finance project that is constantly seeking to combine where there are investment opportunities for cities or investable opportunities for cities to make themselves available to the market, and where there are projects that could be combined together into an investable package. And then if I come to Spain, we have a number of particularly interesting startups that are now beginning to look like there's a whole lot of possibility. Aerox Advanced Polymers is a coating system for wind turbine blades, just beginning to really get an uplift in terms of attracting funding, but also in terms of its market penetration. And just a simple but such a helpful idea of shipping containers that fold up. So we stop filling up container ships all over the world with empty volume, enormously increasing emissions from all of the shipping backwards and forwards. But also, if you think about just operational cost, storage space, it's a no-brainer to flat pack it and then reinstall it. And this is a bit of a celebrity in terms of Spanish terms. This is a Hyperloop, a very, very fast version of a Hyperloop, an extremely fast train, traveling more than 1,000 kilometers an hour, and looking at creating the kind of travel infrastructure between major European places that would effectively substitute planes, close enough to start getting us off aviation fuel, or at least reduce our taste for that. And this is a very interesting example, because this is something that is local, that has gone overseas, competed in the US, won an award, come back, has stayed in contact with its Dutch counterpart, which also won an award, and has ended up becoming one big joined-up European system, now operating in a global system of 4 of the kind of best leading-edge, very hyper-fast trains, Hyperloop solutions for transport. So here is an example where Europe is really beginning to put itself right at the edges of possibility, and where, for example, in Spain, huge tracts of land, infrastructure needs, and big distances under extreme temperature conditions, you have an ideal opportunity here to test something that's practical. So I'm just going to finish with some flashes of what's happening in Spain to bring some of this to life. There are a lot of initiatives in terms of national hookups among the KICs, so these European institutes, innovation communities, but also amongst different national bodies and national government ministries, and an effort that is persisting through political cycles, so continuing to go forward from one government to the next. And there are a lot of initiatives at subnational level in regions. This one I'm particularly passionate about. This is a partnership work that we are starting now with Mondragon, which is about Mondragon itself paying attention to its own renewable future as one of the most successful European models of cooperative, in fact, most successful global models of cooperative organization and work, but a series of industries based on high carbon steel manufacturing technologies that will need to change their core materials and their processes. So it's got a business model renewal issue. But there's something fascinating here for me. Mondragon has built a $21 billion business and 472 cooperative organizations based on the principle that human beings looking after one another, collective interest, is meaningful enough, stable enough, and enduring enough to survive shocks and changes and to create prosperous social and economic benefit. And that principle of looking after ourselves as a collective, as opposed to just looking after myself as an individual, is an extraordinarily important insight and solution for our general problem of climate change. It's just very few places in the world know how to convert it into governance models, industrial models, economic models, and social models. So the challenge we are working on with Mondragon is how would you turn what Mondragon knows how to do into a climate change solution for the whole world? Not the manufacturing businesses, which will change already, but the social cooperative governance design and principles that enables us to operate with resources in ways that are circular and shared. Andalusia, one of the areas in Europe, we talk about the stories of South Africa running out of water, of Cape Town running out of water. In your own backyard, you have areas of Spain that are already running out of water every time you hit the summer months and 6 million tourists arrive. So here there are very real problems around resilience and adaptation, and an opportunity to test early and quickly what are the alternatives to desalination or shipping icebergs in or shipping in bottled water, which is completely unsustainable. How do we begin to design for a very different set of climatic and social conditions, and what do we do about tourism? And then we come to Valencia. One of the deep demonstrations that we are supporting now is with the Port of Valencia. Thinking about ports are right at the crunch point between international legislation, national legislation, and local legislation. They handle massive energy flows in, energy flows out. They deal with materials. They are one of the most interesting transition zones to think about how would you decarbonize the entire setup, but in such a way that it goes backwards into all of the supply chains that converge in ports. And this will be another of the key areas that we work on with the Port of Valencia. And then I come to Catalonia. We are starting quite a series of conversations. We were here last week to talk about Climathon in Barcelona this year. And we're looking forward. I don't know whether I can yet say that we're actually about to, but we're certainly proud to say that we're partnering with Climate Infrastructure Partnership, and putting out a statement in which we are participating as well on the critical importance of infrastructure in the big changes. If you think, I don't know to what extent you know about China, and you think about an initiative called the Belt and Road Initiative. If the Belt and Road Initiative goes ahead as planned, with the level of fossil carbon emissions that it depends upon, you can forget 2 degrees for the planet. It's not a question of whether Europe versus the US, Trump, Europe, China. If the Belt and Road goes ahead, we will not make 2 degrees, let alone 1.5. So it's an enormous imperative for us to quickly partner as fast as we can on infrastructure partnerships, a focus on international partnerships and business partnerships to try and work out how do we collectively increase pressure and solutions to decarbonize something like the Belt and Road, and to collectively join in partnership between what China can do and what we can do. I'm going to finish there with a provocation. Again, this was we ran a conference last year with Mal Shevkovich looking at the core financial industry and some challenges to ourselves and our own practice of working in financial innovation, sustainable finance, to think about how do we move beyond classes of assets that we're comfortable to call green into beginning to challenge the core structures and assumptions of the whole financial system. And relating that up then to some of our biggest strategic and political choices on the role that Europe plays and the role that Europe's cities and regions play. I will close there, and very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for this introduction. It's very interesting to me to see how through the Recity talks we've been hosting guests like Rob Hopkins from Community Transition Initiatives, no? And they said, and they were explaining how from the community, from the grassroots, right, without looking to any kind of private partnership or stakeholder, you just can reframe the way you live and reimagine a future. And we were debating about pros and cons about that and the need of the behavioral change. And what was interesting to me in that kind of debate, it was that they did admit that that is a necessary change, the society and the behavioral change, and that this is small, it's sprawled and disseminated worldwide, and is small scale. And at the same time, you have these huge centralized projects like, I don't know, many, Desert Tech, and how to bring in a sustainable Europe in 2015, solar energy from the Sahara Desert in Europe and fix everything, right? Oh, the nuclear fusion. Therefore, there has been lots of debates here through our conferences and of course recently worldwide around the role of innovation and how and if you can bridge of course these different speed, different level transitions, right? And which are the key mechanisms to do that? And so while from one side, a public-private partnership through these big projects, right, can indeed accelerate the transition, so it could be very useful, it can be key. But at the same time, we know that they're leaving behind people. They're just replicating the injustice and unsustainable system we don't want, being technically driven. So my first reaction would be, it was very interesting to see how KIC, even if based on public-private partnership, indeed is trying to look at how to reframe even the public-private per se, right? So before just giving the floor to the answer, I would just would like if you can briefly maybe build on that. I mean, is there a trap to run for the climate emergency and look for, and through public-private partnership, the solutions or the dynamics we want to achieve, because they will be effective in the middle term, let's say, even if we know that there is a trap there in terms of social justice. So I'm mentioning this because one of our objectives is linking climate resilience to social innovation and social sustainability. So after having been talked with Rob Hopkins, this community-led, which they admit we're not enough, it's too small, too slow. And then who's fast is not just. And public-private partnership has been always considered like the leader of injustice and mind-taming, right? Business as usual solution at the end. So KIC is to me one of maybe the new promise of reframing innovation through a more just innovation, but then through public-private. So can you build a bit on that, and where could be the promises and the limits of that?
So we are a public-private partnership to the extent that we have organizations that are privately held and run, and organizations that are publicly held and run, and organizations that are state organizations of different flavors, and they coexist and work with one another. The majority of the money that we make available in a granting mechanism, so we don't ask for a financial return, and it comes through the European Institute of Innovation Technology, which means it's our money, it's taxpayer money. So one of our duties of care is to make sure that it's going where it needs to go. And we don't structure where it goes along the lines of public-private partnership design principles. What we structure where it needs to go is along the lines of collective intelligence, partnership with demand, with problem owners, and therefore the chance that it will go to work as quickly as possible in the real world of transformation and exploration of change and possibilities. So to that extent, I don't know whether we break the model or we create a different set of possibilities for what a public-private partnership stands for in Europe. Certainly, one of our interesting experiences in the last 18 months, 2 years, has been to reflect together as a community and determine that we need to make a radical change in the way in which we are directing innovation at the problem. I think where you saw me refer, for example, to Andalusia, we have one of the most interesting initiatives we have is in exploring regulatory innovation in the relationship between cities and its own residents. And this is really looking and experimenting with almost a social contract between the city and its residents on trying to understand what do we collectively care for and wish to sign up for, and how would we create a regulatory mechanism to hold each other to account, the city government and the citizens, street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood. And this, we're partnering with an organization called Dark Matters, which is saying, look, one of the boring ways in which you change things is intervening in regulation, but not big, high-level industrial policy, the micro rules that connect us, that bind us, that we make with each other. And we have technologies to make that possible. In this case, it's experimenting with distributed ledger to create micropayments to incentivize or hold to account on either side residents of the city and the city government. So there are many, many initiatives of a social and a community, a policy bent, not just kind of big technology substitutions. I think the biggest challenge we have is how to aggregate them up, connect them up, design them up so that we begin to give ourselves hope and confidence, because we start to look at the combination of effects, and it gives us a sense of pathways. Because it feels like at the moment we don't have a narrative for what we're moving to. We've got lots of narratives for what we're moving away from. Stop using fossil fuels, stop using a car, take a plane. But we don't really have a sense of what is the alternative future we're supposed to be moving to. We need narratives for that. And narratives, for the way we're built, need some form of experience. A combination of imagination and experience.
Exactly this paradigm of
Exactly.
I quit you the car, I quit you, I tax you. No, I'm providing you this feature, that path, that mechanism, and exactly.
And we need, if we want everyone to come with us, we need to build it ourselves, plural, not a bunch of experts telling us what's good for us.
Any reaction from the public? Questions you have? Intervention? Yes, please. There's the microphone there.
Yeah, otherwise I'll try it like this.
Okay.
You had a very inspiring story, especially showing how...
It's for the
You need the translation.
I'll need
Okay.
it. Thank you very much for that presentation and the inspiring story how small-scale innovation is not enough. We need system change. At the same time, we are here at the seat of BBVA. What is the role of banks and big bank or retail bank or systemic bank in that change? How do you see that role and how do you see that role?
You want to go first?
No, I would say that financial sector as a whole plays a key role, no, to mobilize climate finance, not only from investor side but also banks. No, banks we have a capillarity that we can arrive to give support to small SMEs that are relevant for the change. So I would say that we have to combine the role of banks and the role of investors, no, to mobilize this climate finance. We have a lot to do. In our case, we have a commitment to mobilize 100 billion euros for the next 8 years. We mobilized last year 12 billion. It's not enough. I mean, we have to mobilize others to join this kind of pledge. And I think that banks today are working quite strongly on this agenda. European Commission also is, with the action plan, is mobilizing the smart regulation to promote sustainable finance. So, but we don't have time. We have to hurry up. So that's totally agree that we have to take part on this huge challenge.
That's indeed a very good question. Because I read some weeks ago that actually, and the very same Rockefeller Foundation helped. I guess it was Thessaloniki and few more cities, and rising up community resilience through blockchain technology and local currencies. And we remember we were chatting about these big banks making a lot of efforts at big scales and providing this financial mechanism. And there is indeed a gap, of course, because of the time frame you have. You can address the single consumer and the big financial system. So do you think there could be some synergy between this local currency and local level while big banks are allowing and working on the big system transition? Or because there is this gap, right?
Yeah. No, I think we have to play at other levels. I would say the banking system as a whole has to work on 3 levels. Financing, managing, and engaging. So banking system has to finance and mobilize finance, the flows to promote this type of innovations and even at a small level. But also banks have to play a key role of managing better climate risk. Also insurers. So we have to integrate this in our framework, in our business model. So this is absolutely critical. But also on the third idea is that we have to engage. We have to engage with our clients. We have to engage with our employees, with our investors, with the ecosystem of innovation, because alone we are not going to too much. So I would say that nobody could say that today we have a strong complicity within the banking industry, promoting, for instance, the principles for responsible banking, to promote a different way of banking. No, we have a lot to do, but I think that we are building the foundations to make this change that our society needs. So yeah, I agree with you.
And if I can perhaps add in, I come from 20 years of working in insurance and banking, and one of the challenges is that the financial system has been doing business with itself for a long time, and it has disconnected in many points from the financial needs of the real world economy. If you add in to that the challenge that the real world economy is based on a set of definitions of value, which are locking us into the systems that are making us completely unsustainable if we want to keep growing as a human population, then you have a particularly complicated thing to unwind. We have to change our definition of value, reconnect a different definition of value into the core financial system, and enable it to understand that sustainability and green is not a subcategory of asset, but the purpose and intent of the entire financial system, both on the risk side and on the stocks and flows, the cash side. And that's a big ask. I think the interesting thing is that if you think about banks in our lives, are the things that stand around and connected to our homes, our choices on whether we can afford a car or not, or what we can do. They are literally moments in time that have so much opportunity, time, space, and life stage, to ask us to pay attention to a different set of value indicators. And that, I believe, is the huge opportunity of banking, to act as the intermediary that reframes what value is. Mortgages, lending, some of the core credits, the core kind of mechanics of what enables people to project a little bit forward into the future. It's not where the mainstream discourse is, but it is where I hope it might get.
Yes, please.
En Andalucía hay cultivo de frutas exóticas con un...
Ah, sí.
Eso parla en català també, la traducció, sí?
Sí, solo si puedo pedir de introduciros antes.
Sí.
¿Quién sois?
Bueno, yo soy biólogo, me dedico a la divulgación, lo intento, y entonces una de las preguntas que me hago primero es que lo importante es dejar de hacer cosas mal, ¿no? Entonces mi pregunta es, Andalucía, ¿no? Hay una parte de la agricultura de Andalucía se dedica a cultivo de frutas exóticas con una gran demanda de agua por hectárea. Entonces mi pregunta es, Climactic hace recomendaciones desagradables, que decir en el sentido, esto no se debe hacer. Ya sé que lo deberían hacer los políticos de allá, ¿no? Pero posiblemente, por el tema de no perder votos, no lo van a hacer. Pero creo que lo primero que hay que hacer es pensar en dejar de hacer cosas mal. Después innovación, partenariado, pero es que hay cosas que son desagradables, pero igual vosotros podéis hacerlo, ¿no? Los políticos no lo van a hacer.
Yes, I agree. And we certainly can do it, and we should do it, and we are doing it. At the moment, for example, where we are focused is Silesia with coal mining. As I said, we play one piece in a puzzle, and our piece is innovation. The value of innovation is hope. Because the problem is, if you go straight to Andalusia, you go to the Andalusian government, you say, you guys are crazy, it's as bad as California, you're growing a whole lot of things here that are absolutely unsustainable. The immediate question is, okay, maybe you're right, but what's the alternative? And this pathway to what the alternative is, options for alternatives that you can choose, that you can experiment, you can scale, you can begin to try out alternatives, you can build a sense of meaning and identity, you have to wean several generations of people off the idea that they grow oranges and onto something different, perhaps less sexier. You've got a pathway there. That's exactly what instruments like the KIRSTEN exist to do. Generate options, create pathways and narratives that are about making alternatives together, not just showing up and saying this is bad. And you're right, politicians are not going to do it. Not at the moment. Maybe the European elections will change that. I have just lived through the Australian election and I'm feeling a bit bruised.
We invited you here just 1 week before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sí.
Sí, hola. Yo me considero artista climático, para decirlo así, o artista político. Y digamos que yo lo que encuentro a faltar en la narrativa, en su narrativa es, digamos que emplea su empresa, para, concienciar a la sociedad civil, ¿no? Teniendo en cuenta que del negacionismo que todavía hay. Que Donald Trump es el líder de ese negacionismo. En ese sentido, creo que la educación o la ecoeducación es la base. Si no, este vínculo que queréis marcar entre lo global y lo local se diluye, porque el vínculo tiene que ver, digamos, la consideración de lo local, o sea, de la sociedad civil, para decirlo así, en su último extremo, ¿no? Por otro lado, digamos, no has mencionado tampoco, digamos, lo que es la fusión nuclear, que se supone, yo todavía no lo sé, porque hay muy pocas noticias, que es la esperanza, digamos, realmente de frenar el cambio climático en cuanto a nivel energético, pero tú tampoco lo has mencionado, ¿no? Y vaya, me quedo con las narrativas plurales.
Okay, so let me first engage with your observation about connecting to people and raising awareness and the narratives that will help people make a connection between a global planetary problem and a local reality. We are a platform to fund innovation. We can fund where many others will not fund. We can have uncomfortable conversations where others cannot. One of the areas where we are investing our attention is in climate communication, because I consider it to be a disaster. Showing people pictures of polar bears and icebergs is not helping. So we are working with some partners in the US and in Europe to understand how and work through interviews across all ends of the aspects of the political, social, generational spectrum to understand how do we build the narratives that do resonate, that are, if they need to be about air pollution, then let's make them about air pollution. It doesn't matter as long as ultimately it adds up to a sense of the effects that we need. And what you didn't hear me talk about, but is something that is very much part of what we are looking at, and I believe passionately in, is the role of visual arts, media and culture, music, in the way in which those narratives resonate. So I actually am hoping that we have just managed to secure an agreement around Climathon, which will bring in a whole element of music around what happens in that phenomenon globally. Touch wood, I'm not going to reveal it yet until it's done a deal. But I am also particularly concerned that climate change has been the preserve of engineers, of STEM education, science, technology, which it desperately needs, but it's missing all of the extent to which the arts and humanities can inspire us to act beyond our reason and act because of a sense of purpose or good or simply care. So yes, it is part of our world, not yet a consolidated part because it has not been part of our history, but it's very much a part of what we are looking to go and why we are looking to go. We have a conversation at the moment in Germany about creating a narratives lab so that we can look at how do we create and forge and create the conditions for forging alternative narratives, and what are they and how do they give us a sense of vision and possibility. On your question of nuclear, no, we don't touch nuclear. We don't touch nuclear for a very specific reason, which is that the unintended consequences, if you're thinking about systemic effects and unintended consequences, I would consider nuclear to be one of the areas where we would really not invest. As an organization, this is a choice at all levels of our governance, not just in terms of the unintended consequences of the technology itself, but most importantly, its multi-generational implications. Especially if we were to really scale nuclear to handle global energy needs with an exponentially growing global population, we don't have a planet big enough geologically to store nuclear waste safely. And that's writing a check for our own future, but not for the subsequent generations. But that is our position.
Fusion,
okay. There you go, okay. Then in that case, no, we don't look at nuclear. We are supporting other elements of technologies other than nuclear.
But then, of course, you're sitting in the same path of centralized development, which is highly unsustainable from the social perspective. Because the fusion would be, of course, environmental, more sounding than fission, but then it would remain a highly centralized top-down system. So it won't be a disruptive innovation, socially consistent, I guess.
Well, the question is it resilient? I do have a concern that I see often in the energy debate around an assumption that our physical environment will be an extended present of an extended present, physiologically. So, I see plans for enormous energy grids that assume that we'll be running energy networks above ground. I come from a country where 3 cyclones a year rips down every single piece of energy infrastructure. You ramp that up globally, we're going to deal with a physical environment that is materially changed, and I'm not sure we've designed technologies for that yet. I would include that in my concern around nuclear.
Sí, muchas gracias. Aquí. Muchas gracias, doctora, por la intervención. Muchas gracias. Soy miembro de la Fundación Cataluña Europa. Soy empresario, vivo en Barcelona. Y esta mañana podíamos desayunarnos con una entrevista en La Vanguardia, un periódico importante español, en el que entrevistaban, no recuerdo su nombre, pero es un premio Nobel, no sé si de física, de química, está en Barcelona, y decía algo un poco o un mucho apocalíptico. Ah, mira, muy bien, si me lo dices el nombre porque yo no veo nada. Robert Schronck. Maybe you know. Yo no lo conocía, ¿ok? Pero decía algo, un punto apocalíptico, y es que la discusión en el mundo científico no está en si habrá o no habrá cambio climático, sino si estamos a tiempo de encontrar una solución. Y él, como solución, decía si encontraremos un nuevo planeta donde vivir, porque este se acaba. What do you think about?
Well, I know when I was working within insurance and was working on strategic innovation for insurers, how do you help the core business model of insurance change? One of the relationships we had was with the work that SpaceX and Elon Musk is doing to build technologies for Mars, because very immediately it emerged that this was very much nothing to do with Mars, has everything to do with technologies to stay on planet Earth. I am a mother of 2 children, so amongst the range of possibilities, plan A, Pluto, plan X, nuclear is in there, so is carbon capture and sequestration. Another planet is there. I'm going to direct all of my life energy on trying to save this one. And if that fails, let's hope someone out there is looking for asteroids that are livable. But I also, when I read between the lines, when I listen from the inside to those who are genuinely moving within the halls of decision makers at a geopolitical level, in nation states and in the research and the writing of the Ipcc report and so on, it is demoralizing what is not happening, what is happening and why it's happening. On the other hand, I come from perhaps it is just that I'm natively optimistic, or I'm an optimist by force of will. But if you look at the capacity of the human species to exercise ingenuity and creativity under pressure, I think we will find solutions. I think our problem for this next 10 years and this generation is how many of us need to die for that to happen. How many of us will come along on a journey of ingenuity that kicks in sooner rather than later? I don't think that we won't find solutions. It's really just how little and how late, and what's the price we pay. So for me, every piece of energy I'm going into is what's the big wealth of possibilities that I can create. And if I think about just in the last 10 years, when this kick was created 10 years ago, it was inconceivable that we would challenge the entire research and innovation logic of Europe to say bright, shiny things are not enough. It's only 10 years. It's not long enough, but it's too long, but still, ramp it up by another 5, by another 2, and perhaps we really can do something.
Moltes gràcies per la conferència. Jo soc Francesc Colomer, soc el president de l'executiva de la Fundació Catalunya Europa. Volia fer una observació que jo crec que és molt important en el que estem parlant, que és el vessant polític de tota la qüestió que ens està exposant. Fa uns anys vam començar amb partits exclusivament verds o moviments que defensaven exclusivament la qüestió verda com una novetat. aquí a Espanya, a Catalunya gairebé no vam ser-hi a temps perquè les reivindicacions verdes van anar impregnant tots els partits mica en mica i pràcticament la majoria de partits van assumir elements de la necessitat ecològica, etc. Ara bé, estem en un canvi, en un moment en què sí que hi ha una ruptura política molt important i estan apareguent, diguéssim, vies polítiques que són negacionistes i que estan frontalment oposades a una qüestió de conservació, etc. Clar, el cost polític que té fer aquest canvi, fer aquesta innovació, és molt alt. Perquè, esclar, estem demanant una innovació que, començant per les finances i acabant per la indústria manufacturera, té un impacte brutal. Com el podem assumir? I ara, si em permet, vostè ha posat un exemple que era el de Mondragón. Mondragón jo crec que és un cas molt interessant de col·lectivisme polític. O sigui, trobarem pocs llocs en el món on hi hagi aquest sentiment barrejat de col·lectivisme, nacionalisme, en fi, que té unes connotacions molt especials. No crec que en trobem gaires, com tant de bo en trobéssim més, no amb la seva història, malauradament, perquè va haver-hi problemes abans, però el resultat ha donat un sentiment col·lectivista molt fort. Jo crec que no el tindrem, aquest sentiment. Per tant, com ho veu? Què podem fer políticament parlant per tirar endavant això i què poden fer vostès des de la seva associació per tirar això endavant? Perdoneu la llargada,
Necessària.
I agree with you. Mondragón is extraordinary, and you can't just replicate a cultural identity everywhere else. It's in fact the core of the discussion we're having with them. What can you extract that you could proxy elsewhere? Perhaps in legislation, in codes of conduct, in financial incentives, in legal incentives, in cross-holding or share participation, because it's going to be a question of proxying. What can you proxy into other systems that would give us something like even just a notion of the mechanics of polycentric governance? I think I don't have an answer to the what I would describe as a Mexican standoff in generations between political interests, political powers in force, and a willingness to act now, but act now for the sake of the future. I have experiences that I am bringing to bear on what we are doing and that I have seen work. Reverse mentoring works. Simply taking 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds and asking them to spend 3 or 4 months accompanying boards of directors, individual executives and directors. It's hard for several weeks on end to systematically explain why corruption or vested interest or self-interest makes sense. After a while, some common ground begins to come through. And reverse mentoring is a fascinating way of effectively, practically achieving what the Welsh have done with the law of generations, where they have asked the decision makers of this generation to think about the responsibility they bear to the subsequent 3. Conversations with city governments or with regional governments explaining what does an asbestos case look like. An asbestos case, if you are within industry, looks like something that comes to get you 30 years later. And what they come to get you with is all of the papers that show that you knew you were sitting on top of a situation that was damaging people. We are in exactly that situation. So just helping people think through, it's not that it will end here. You will have subsequent generations coming back in time to say you knew and you still took these decisions. Sometimes that gets people. Sometimes I think we have an opportunity at the level of subnational levels to do something like the law of generations or the American Native Indian things, where we start to ask for decisions that think about liability for the longer term. But I think there's also an enormous number of financial mechanisms that we simply haven't thought about bringing to bear. And that is, if you do bring demand and supply finance together, and you also take a temporal perspective, and you think about the value that you could put, not the tax and the cost, but the value you put on the future, and you begin to pull that value into the present, then I think there's also the possibility of a set of incentive mechanisms. We are also experimenting with some projects that look at how do you get lending to flow in that way, so that it starts to lend to the future benefit and not to the present cost. I think there are some very practical solutions we can choose, not just the ideological solutions.
Sí.
Una pregunta. En un momento de su ponencia ha hablado que en China había como un modelo o como un proyecto de desarrollo que podía echar por tierra en cierta medida pues las iniciativas de mitigación y de adaptación por el cambio climático. No sé si he mencionado algún nombre concreto. ¿A qué se refería exactamente? No sé si mi pregunta se entiende. ¿Ha hablado de un proyecto BELT o qué es?
It's called the Belt and Road Initiative. It's an initiative that is an entire infrastructure set of infrastructure investments that reach from China right through to essentially almost literally around the world.
Europa.
Yes.
Asia, Europa.
Mm-hmm. And it's currently not designed on the basis of net zero carbon. And the scale is extraordinarily huge.
Any further? Yes.
Hola, gràcies. Sí, una pregunta molt ràpida. Vostè ha mencionat que la foto del Polar Bear on top of ice, sobre el gel, no funciona això. Per què no funciona?
Because if I have school fees to pay or a mortgage to pay, or I can't quite get to the end of the month with my salary, the taxes go up, inflation goes up, I'm worried about instability, I have something, in the scheme of things, I might have a moment of emotional response to a polar bear, but ultimately I'm not going to change the things I buy in the supermarket or the way in which I earn money or the decisions I make to travel to work. It's the disconnect between, if I were to change everything about my life, would I change it because of that? Now, that said, it's a generalization. My children will sit me down and the first thing they will tell me about are bees, polar bears. They will tell me about species. And I'm all really curious about the fact that they are inhabiting a world where interdependency is something they feel real and tangible. And I'm inhabiting a world where somehow, somewhere, I lost, or I was taught to lose the perspective that that interdependency should count as much, be priced as much, and be valued as much as the frenetic pace of modern life. So possibly within the next generation, or with our children, or with children generally, there is a possibility of that emotional energy lasting long enough to change behavior. My concern is when I think of the communities that we are connecting to in some of the places in Europe where you would need to see change fastest, coal miners in Germany and Silesia, they really don't care about polar bears. But we really need them to change. So this is why I'm trying to work out how can you build a narrative for coal miners which is about the things they care about. Because they do care about the fact that their children are showing up with tumors in their lungs. That they care about. So it's, I'm generalizing, but I think if you look at the success of climate communications, it's not a success story. You don't have a planet full of people who understand just how quickly we need to change.
But indeed, it's a very relevant question because I remember in one of our discussion in a workshop, we've been debating about the relevance of awareness building, of course, so polar bears or whatever, or the last report, Global Assessment 3.0, IBES, mentioning 1 million species we've lost and blah, blah, blah. But there is this disconnection between the need of building the awareness of the urgency and extinction of rebellion, etc., and the disconnection between how to do what. And there has been a moment, I remember, with the guys of Ecolize and TransitionNet, they say there has been all these movies about catastrophic scenarios that just, for waking up people. But then the issue is how much we provide inspiration, solution, and positive thinking and creativity rather than just care and, and that feeling of, wow, we need to react because there is the polar bear, but then there are no tools for, and I see this parallel within KIC, they're providing kind of tools, inspirations, platform for creating solutions rather than building the awareness on focusing. I mean, the mission is not there, no?
But actually we're now trying to resolve exactly the same problem, which is the equivalent of the tools that are the single solutions also don't mobilize change. Yeah. So this is why I think conversations like this and what is happening particularly in cities is the greatest hope we have, because if cities can start to playfully, delightfully, inspirationally implement whole new districts that look different, that are different to walk through, to experience, we will build a sense of energy around ways forward. It's the real possibility in concentrated form to model alternatives.
Yes.
Hello. I'm Massimiliano Grancieri, young researcher, PhD candidate at Politecnico di Torino. Thank you for your speech, your lecture. You gave a lot of emphasis on climate change mitigation, and the focus of my question is climate change adaptation. How do you evaluate adaptation? How do you recommend to donors, insurance companies and banks how to evaluate? Meaning that you don't have to evaluate the best ones, but maybe you have just to start evaluating, seeing that whether someone is adapting or not. Thank you.
It's probably, if we could answer that in this room, we could go and solve a really big problem out there. So first of all, we also work a lot on adaptation, and in fact in some ways it's one of the fastest growing areas of activity of Climactic at the moment. That question is actually being asked by our funder on how are you going to show us metrics around adaptation achievements. I used to work in insurance, as I said, and one of the interesting aspects of working in insurance, I worked in Italy and I worked in Australia. In Australia, insurers repair. So they're the biggest home repairers and the biggest motor repairers in Australia. There are two big companies. And that means you are suddenly in a world of possibility, which I think has been an enormous insight for me. You can start to experiment with practical solutions that materially change the risk outcome. So we were experimenting with four-dimensional printing, where you print with the property of the material world to change itself, and printing parts of houses that would change themselves without any intervention for human beings in different storm conditions and protect the house from being blown apart. In this particular case was a garage roller door in Australia. It's a very common feature of Australian homes. It's a weak point in cyclones. And what that demonstrated is that if you can find practical solutions to adaptation solutions that reduce the risk, that make a house or people or food production more resilient, you can price that, because you can model what the alternative would have been if all of what was there and the value that sits there would have been wiped out. It's a little bit like what you see when you walk into a European city, in any European city, and you look at the big piazza space in the middle, and what you see is the invisible cost of value of all of the real estate that is not built there. And it's not built there so that there is a public space for meaning, identity, debate, discussion and decision making, but that's a value. It's a negative volume value. You can price it. And I think that this is where we are pushing the research. How can we take something of that effect and think about valuing either the opportunity cost or the at-risk cost if we didn't intervene? It's hard to hold it over long time frames, but there's something in that, at least to start with.
Yes, here in the back.
Hola, bueno, moltes gràcies per l'exposició. Jo soc periodista i volia preguntar una mica quin paper creieu que estan fent o que seria desitjable que fessin o tinguessin els mitjans de comunicació aquí a Catalunya, a Espanya, i també si estan tenint un altre paper a Europa o a d'altres països, no?
Well, that's a good question. So I think it comes back to the question and the challenge we had here, which is what are the narratives? Human beings change because of narratives. We've used story to change ourselves for 5,000 years, to go to new countries, to open cities, to go to war and not to go to war. We use story. It's the main mobilizing mechanism, and it still is. My question to the entire media industry is, what are the stories you are telling? Are they stories of hope and enablement and mobilization and possibility, or are they stories that continue to hold us paralyzed in a question of if, maybe, what's being done to me? Now that's tricky because it takes you into the boundary of rhetoric, and I come from a background in understanding the value of rhetoric as a well-structured discourse to mobilize action. But of course it has a flip side, a dark side in propaganda. But I think I would love to see more stories being told from the people who are trying things, making things happen, who have hope and optimism and are wielding it, or who are engaged around the tables of industry and large corporations who know they need to change and are actively working on it. It seems to me like there is like a subtext in so much of what we hear, which is a subtext of cynicism and doubt. And yet cynicism and doubt is fragmenting us, and in fragmentation we will fall apart. So I would love to see the subtext change, one of hope and possibility and creativity, and multiple stories that help people believe there's a possibility, or I can go and talk to so-and-so, or I'd love to find out more there. I would love to see that, and actually consider it a call to action, because, as I said, we are looking to work with creative media, with arts, with music, to bring in this other side, the whole emotional decision-making mechanism of the human brain, which is mobilized by story and by imagination.
Any last final set of questions? Maybe I'll keep more than one, and then we try to close.
Thank you. I don't have a question. I just wanted to interact on communication and the role of media. I think it's very, very important, and I just want to share with you a story about an interview that I gave to a media here in Spain once, and I was totally astonished by the final result. So we spent literally 40 minutes interview on so many questions around climate change, and then in the end, when I saw the video that they put on the TV news, it was images of war, the polar bear, and so on and so forth. So I think really media could play a strong role in highlighting the opportunities or highlighting the causes of climate change rather than highlighting the consequences of climate change, the drama, right? But that's really something that you have the power to do, and not us, or I mean, coming from other sectors. So I was really astonished when I saw like images of war and then my face interviewing. So it's like we really have to do something about climate communication.
That's a great comment. But policymakers need some urgent situation and problem to fix in the short term. So it's very easy to fix some. Any other common final question, remark, or I could just move into thanks, Tony and BBVA, for hosting us, and thanks for the time and for being here, and for all the interesting questions. I hope to see you, of course, in October from the Climaton, and also in a couple of weeks we'll have another meeting probably not here in the Fundació Tapias, about not innovation but implementation. We'll be inviting here one of the Ipcc scientists working on climate plans, and Diane Reckien, is handling this 800 European plans database and doing review about the state of the arts in Europe, about how cities move forward or not, about planning for climate change, and we'll be debating about what they're doing, other cities doing, what they're not doing, what they're just writing on the paper and is living there. In this case, we got just into the implementation and innovation, which is key. So thanks for providing all this inspiring example and positive view. I really appreciate as Italian. So thank you so much and see you next.
Thank you very much.